Well, good morning and welcome back to another week of Smite Esports action. We're going to be starting it off with the Smite Challenger Circuit here today on this lovely Thursday morning. We've got Goodnight Nick, formerly known as Accounting Department, taking on Elysium this time around. So, again, another great set of big names that we're going to be seeing here. J-Mac and Taco on the desk this time around to bring you guys the action on this one.
Yeah, it should be a pretty fun matchup between these two teams, and also a chance for us to see what these other European Smite Challenger Circuit teams have in store for us for Split 2.
Yeah, I mean, Goodnight Nick, as I said, formerly known as Accounting Department, trying to make another run here into the SCC. Taking a look at the current schedule for everything through, we're going to be seeing Goodnight Nick Elysium today. On Saturday, we're going to be seeing Just F6 and Team Joystick from the European region. And then back over on the NA side, we'll see Sleekness take on Average Joe's tomorrow. And then Sunday, Winter Dogs and Tiburones to Tijuana going to be facing off on that morning's slot. As we get ready to go into the standings as well, it's only been 1 week of play so far for them, so we're only just going to see 1-0s across the board, but a little bit of fun with those ones.
Yeah, not really much opportunity given the fact that they haven't had the chance to play the sets yet,
Right.
J-Mac, but it should still be, I think, a great starting point for all of these teams involved, because you want to be able to match up with adapting in the crew, because you don't want to fall behind early on.
Yeah, that's the big thing, is Elysium here kind of sitting tied at the top here with the Snake Hunters, but might not be that same way for a long time. They only lost one set last phase entirely through. That's including the Phase 1 playoffs and including the regular season onto it. So Elysium is the team to beat right now. It used to be Belt Slap last season, but now Elysium has kind of taken those reins.
Certainly not an easy feat either for Goodnight Nick on this one, given the fact that, well, at the very least, though, they had an opportunity to do a little bit of homework. They have one set to work with Elysium's matchup against Pandemonium last week, so that at least could be some great insight for Goodnight Nick in terms of what Elysium is looking for as far as gods are concerned and compositions.
Yeah, but one unfortunate part here for Goodnight Nick is they haven't had the best success so far against Elysium. Last phase, they went 0-2 against them in the regular season play. Couldn't even pull a single game off of them at that. But Goodnight Nick does have some veteranship players on there. Deathwalker, Ice Ice, Wolfie, Kalas, Okeanos over there. If anything, these guys are inventive. They've got some fun stuff that they can pull out there. The most famous one I can think of would be Ice Ice on the Sylvanas jungle.
Deathwalker as well, I think, is another name to kind of keep an eye out for with this Goodnight Nick roster. I feel as though solo lane being as impactful as it is as of late might be really crucial here. If Deathwalker can get off to a strong lead, then maybe there's an opportunity here for Goodnight Nick to look for a turnaround in terms of the history with their set matchups against Elysium.
Yeah, like we were kind of talking, yes, you can get some silly picks into there, but Deathwalker did kind of recreate mini metas over there into that solo lane, so I'm curious to see what he can bring here now that we're in week number 2 of all of the fun here of the SCC and into the esports action for these guys. Now, they got that first set under their belt, they got the nerve shaken out. Let's see what they can do here in this next week of play on the Battleground.
Yeah, it should be a pretty interesting meta as well, because the European side of things, I know there's a tendency to not really be as aggressive in that early to mid game, but with the way that Elysium played last week, J-Mac, kind of alluding to the fact that they're willing to break outside of that mold and be the kind of initiators and the proactive force throughout that early game.
And I think if there's any team, I kind of mentioned it last week, if there's any team to beat Elysium, it'd be Pandemonium, but Pandemonium has been able to take them to the late game stages where they can do that. But Accounting Department, now here, Goodnight Nick, they're also one team that does like to fight in the early game. They like going for these super crazy picks early on. Like I said, Sylvanas Jungle with the Mannequin Scepter is one thing that they did last split, and it's something that you want to fight with early on, and that's what teams need to do to be able to adapt to this Elysium roster here. Spudio, Angry, Tarum, Adapting, Trixtank. Again, more veteran players onto this team. They were the Phase 1 champions for a reason, and it's all going to come down to what can Goodnight Nick do to slow them down more than anything.
One thing I can attest for, though, is that when you are dominating as hard as Elysium have been throughout the first split of the Season 8 in the Smite Challenger Circuit, it does become a little bit more complicated to kind of maintain that supremacy in a sense, just because when you're not losing, you don't really get much of an opportunity to learn if you're constantly just like taking over the competition without really being all that contested. And so I think that this second split is one that could be very crucial for Elysium's growth as a team, just because if they don't have teams that are regularly challenging them to try and push to that next level of play, well, you have a tendency to get a little complacent, I think. And it's just, I think that that's a challenge that's issued to just about every team that's finding themselves at the top of whatever league they're competing in.
Well, we'll see if Goodnight Nick can maybe slow down the pacing here of Elysium as we get ready to go into picks and bans for game number 1. Jumping into here, one thing I never thought I would say this season is that we've been seeing a lot of Sylvanas come through here. Now, last time it was kind of as a joke into the jungle, but now we're actually seeing support Sylvanas pop in here, and it's not just like, a one-time thing, only one guy. There's been quite a few people who have been enjoying the Sylvanas support. Do you think we maybe see an adjustment in picks and bans? I don't think that we see that banned away, but maybe?
Well, given the fact that Goodnight Nick is actually one of the rosters that enjoys running the Sylvanas, I wouldn't be all that surprised to see them maybe opt for it in that support role. Jungle, a little bit of a stretch. I don't feel as though it would really be in Goodnight Nick's best interest to try the Sylvanas jungle up against Elysium, but Elysium's like, hey, we don't even want to see it from you. We're going to make you guys play something else, so Sylvanas actually going to be banned away, and seems as though Elysium just has an emphasis surrounding that Guardian frontline initiation setup basis right now.
Yeah, so far nothing but frontline banned away. The Odin and Osiris on one end, meanwhile the Athena and the Sylvanas on the flip side for Elysium, though they are going to be popping in here with the Artemis as well. One thing that has to be noted here is that this is pre-benevolence nerf onto it, so you may or may not be seeing an abundance of benevolence this game, and hopefully we won't see all 10, but you never know. I mean, that's just the meta that was developed for this time.
But Goodnight Nick, they put so much focus, J-Mac, on trying to just strip away some of those aggressive jungle and solo meta-based picks that they left open one of the most impactful gods, I think, in all of Season 8, Tiamat, going to find her way on the side of Elysium, and that's a pretty intimidating first pick to get locked in.
Yeah, you never really want to just give the Tiamat away, but I mean, look what they prioritize so heavily. Frontline initiation and junglers more than anything, especially adapting's Fenrir taking off the board onto that one. So, Goodnight Nick may have let the ball slip onto that one, but they do manage, at least in the second round, to pick up the Heimdall and the Fafnir around at that dual lane early.
Yeah, solidifying the dual lane early on, though, does make it a little bit easier here for Elysium because they know whether they want to prioritize the hunter pick or the support pick now becomes the priority here for that third pick selection, as Kakolin will find himself on the side of Elysium. So a nice, well-rounded out, aggressive early to making composition. This is very similar to what we saw in Week 1 from Elysium. I like the Chiron when combined alongside the Tiamat because Chiron introduces a nice little metric of range, and it could also pose some issues against the Heimdall because you have to remember, training exercise, he can cleanse himself from that ultimate off of Heimdall. He can also intervene with Heimdall's Bifrost activation by just knocking him out with the Giddy Up. So a lot of components, I think, right now for Elysium that definitely do a strong job at combating some of the aggression that Goodnight Nick's trying to respond with.
And there are just so many hot picks out there that, you know, we gave the Tiamat over to Elysium, but at least that gives them the Morgan Le Fay to pick up on the back end of that one. So both of the top tier mid laners locked in here for these EU teams. Alongside that, Chiron was the Kakullan locked in. We've seen Hardcore primarily in the SPL being the one to really bring that one forward, and it feels like he never went away. It's just he took a little bit of a break here, but Cullen is still back. He's still stronger than ever, I would say, probably. I mean, it feels like he's nigh unstoppable once you get him into that mid-late game.
Well, Goodnight Nick trying to fight fire with fire here, I think, by taking that Guan Yu. Tallow Assault can be a fairly problematic ability for the likes of a Kakolin, given that he's going to be trying to stack that Rage passive by being in that melee range territory, and so you don't want to find yourself eating too many of those Tallow Assault charges on top of the cavalry charge as well, which introduces a nice team fighting component here for Goodnight Nick. And so I like some of the initiation or counter initiation specifically for Goodnight Nick. I'm primarily looking at this Morgan Le Fay also, that knock up, which I was wondering what else is Goodnight Nick going to try to run alongside this to kind of complement it, and the Wheelish I think is a great mix.
I mean, unfortunately for them, that's kind of the only help they're going to get for it, though. You only see the singular knockup out of the Morgan Le Fay. Guan Yu doesn't have one. Fafnir is just going to get some stuns and slows out there. And Heim, well, he's just got his ultimate on top of that for any kind of major CC. Maybe the Gallarhorn. Maybe you can get a cheeky pull off the Gallarhorn, but that's not a very big knockup on it. That's a fairly small one.
Well, I don't think Goodnight Nick really needs to worry all that much about setting up this Awila specifically when you factor in that Tiamat, Kakolin, Kali, all of them have abilities that can easily be channeled through that gravity surge. So it's really just going to come down to heads-up play from Ice specifically and how well he's going to be able to... Goodnight Nick essentially have to threaten the likes of a Tiamat, Kakolin, and Kali in order to really reap the benefits of that gravity surge, because if you're not forcing those leaps, you don't really get a whole lot of assistance out of the Wheelish.
Now, one thing we constantly talk about with Elysium is they're the early game brawl fest of the EU region. They're the ones who love to fight early. Is this Goodnight Nick roster one that is ready to fight early?
Well, potentially. I think that they've definitely got enough experience that for game number 1 at least, this early game, mid-game, prime time performance for a lot of their team god composition is going to depend on how well they can actually administer their aggression throughout the early game. But if you're looking for a time to punish, when you stack it up against the likes of Elysium, adapting mostly on this Kali, I think is the primary threat here, especially when combined along the sides of Angry. Trixtank as well has a great kind of benefit in terms of just mitigating a lot of that early to mid-game pressure as well from Goodnight Nick. The Terra has been such a popular pick lately because of that Earthen Fury.
Well, as we jump into game number 1, as you saw there, J-Mac and Taco bringing the cast forward, and Doug on the camera as per usual, bringing us all the action on the battleground, and Elysium jumping right into it. Angry onto Tiamat. He doesn't get this god very often, and it's not really a god that I normally would associate with Angry, obviously because it's a little bit fresher into the meta, and basically nobody ever gave this god up. I usually kind of associate him with more of the Merlin, more of the Agni, some of those more style gods. So we'll see how he does with this kind of pseudo frontline mage. Once you get into that grounded stance, Tiamat is one of those mages you can just jump right into the fray and basically have not a care in the world.
Should be a fun matchup, though, for the Tiamat up against the Morgan Le Fay, but it's the dual lane. That seems to be the focus right now. Okeanos hanging on by a thread, waiting to hit Bifrost, but he's never going to get an opportunity to look for the escape. In fact, it's going to be Trixtank with the first blood.
They might be getting more on top of that one. Kala stunned out in the body blocks by Trixtank, plus the basic Spudio, and Trixtank will not give Kalas an inch to run here. Training exercise into the giddy up. One more basic soul that's needed. Beads, and the minions will do it. Second kill in the dual lane there for Elysium.
Anytime your dual lane is getting double kill first blooded in the first minion wave is by far the absolute worst case scenario here for Goodnight Nick, because it puts so much pressure onto DW now and Ice as well to try and find a point on the map where they can kind of distract the attention of Elysium so that Elysium doesn't keep trying to channel pressure through that dual lane.
Well, immediately after the 2 kills, they're going to go for a little bit of an invade here, take away that Alpha Harpy on that right-hand or left-hand side of the map. Scorpions yet to spawn so far in the lane. Those come up there at the 2-minute mark, so they'll get a couple of Harpies for themselves and immediately be able to establish that presence. Level 3 on both members of Elysium versus only level 2 there on the Kalas. Now adapting, looking to strike over into the solo lane. Deathwalker caught out and not able to get away. Adapting now on the board. 3 kills for Elysium.
No such thing as a 1v1 when it comes to the competitive playing field. And now with both side lanes having been adequately punished, it's essentially up to Goodnight Nick to try and now just stalemate the match as much as possible. They're likely going to have to start forfeiting a little bit of farm here in terms of just not really being able to push up as hard as both sides have been.
And Trixtank just walks right up and gets the invade onto the purple buff. Those walls able to steal them away, so no buff for the side of Goodnight Nick. And Spudio will immediately go back to his purple buff and take... Did Trixtank just miss that?
We don't talk about those. Zoning.
A zoning hog.
I'm zoning him. He wants to show me he doesn't even need it to clear.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay. Well, Trixtank, despite the miss onto the hog, they still
Should've
secure
used
their
it on
purple.
the other purple buff.
Maybe the first
Just because.
One. Nah.
No,
need on that first.
For the invade purple buff, he walks up. Imagine that's like the ultimate power move.
Okeanos, he's going to get thrown right back into the clutches, and Spudio waiting for him on the other side of the Bifrost. And Okeanos will be able to make it out this time. Bede's still on cooldown for a few more seconds, and luckily for him, he didn't end up needing them this time around. Elysium keeping up that pressure in the dual lane. Trixtank waiting to take a chance to go back here, and will likely be able to pick up that Gauntlet of Thieves early on, as he did manage to get that first blood bounty, so he's got a little bit of extra gold in his pocket.
And it's not just Trixtank who's got a little bit of extra gold. Spuddio and
toxic.
The dual lane from Goodnight Nick, both rocking the Benevolence, like we would have originally assumed, given that this is the pre-Benevolence nerf that came through. These players are playing on Deathwalker as well, actually going to pick up that Benevolence. So there's 3 Benevolences on the side of Goodnight Nick, which could potentially help out a pretty large amount here, because the gold lead has already started to trickle over into Elysium's favor. Nearly 1,600 gold on the side of Elysium, which is pretty impactful when you're not even 5 minutes into a game.
And if anything, it's on the 3 who have already died for their first time through here, both dual laners and the solo lane picking that one up. Meanwhile, onto the flip side, Elysium, they've got 3 of their own, both into the duo, and 1 for the mid laner here with Angry picking that one up. But it seems more common that when the mid laners have picked up this item, when this was kind of the big hot topic in the SPL, that most players would just end up selling that Benevolence once they got to that 6th slot.
Yeah, Benevolence, while it can be great for just helping you gain a little bit of additional gold, but the main theme, J-Mac, is that you don't want to be dying if you're going to opt for this Benevolence starter, and that becomes a little bit of a concern in my mind, because Elysium, their side lanes have already proven to be a little bit vulnerable against some of this Elysium early game pressure. I mean, both sides having died just really gives no outs for Ice Ace on this Awelish, because if he wants to play aggressive from duo or solo, he's going to be having to play aggressive into a disadvantage in terms of experience and itemization.
Well, Trixtank going to walk at Kalos and keep him from being able to take those mid camps. Wolfie going to throw the sigil out over the wall, but not find anyone with it, and the gold lead is already starting to spiral forward. Elysium 1,500 gold, but hold that, as Taram might be in a bit of trouble into the solo lane. He gets rooted out immediately, and Ice will finally be able to put Goodnight Nick on the board on a good rotation to the solo.
A great punish and 2 ultimates expended from Goodnight Nick, but given the fact that Elysium doesn't really seem to have an immediate point of response, definitely works out for Goodnight Nick here, and at least establishes that Elysium can't totally have the side lanes for free, as Trixtank, one more time, going to actually steal the Forp away from Goodnight Nick. These furious walls from Terra are just so problematic. You have to keep in mind they do just enough damage, really, for that confirmation.
I'd be raging, honestly. That's the second time he's stolen something away from Goodnight Nick. I'd be yelling up something fierce on my team, like, guys, you really just gave Terra another steal? Like, I can understand the purple buff early on. You don't have a lot of damage. But at this point, that's a 2v1 over here on that solo lane side, and they just kind of let him walk up and take that one away. Well, that's going to allow Elysium to continue pushing that gold lead for themselves. It did get stopped a little bit by the kill in solo lane, but still sitting a little over 1,000.
Spuddio kind of just toying around with the idea of playing aggressive here, but it's adapting who wants the focus to be onto Callis currently. Morgan Le Fay, it's a knockup, it's good. Gravity Surge in for Ice, but he might have just pulled himself to his own death.
Adapting's going to leap in, but he doesn't have the damage to follow through. Destruction has expired. Kalas needs one more hit, so does Ice. Somebody's got to get the shot, but it's going to be Kalas taking down Adapting. Ice living on a thread of health at the top, and Trixtank's not going to let it go through. Centaurus fires, but not going to find a home. Kalas going to de-transform out. Masterful shot, not enough damage. Now Angry is going to have to play zone against Wolfie just to keep him away, and they'll go for the red buff steal. Meanwhile, Deathwalker, looking for a blue buff steal, has to use the cavalry charge.
Big signs of life, though, from Goodnight Nick. They just absolutely sat on top of Elysium when they were the ones that were initially trying to be the aggressors, and just not worth it for Elysium to continue that engagement. Spuddio as well, because of that rotation that he made. Okeanos, on the other hand, was late to the party, but that's because he was spending that time that Spuddio had invested for the rotation just to farm, and now this is a practically even duo lane, a practically even solo lane, and that early game advantage that Elysium had been able to establish early on pretty much negated by that last little skirmish in mid.
Spadio also able to confirm that Scorpion into the dual lane as well. So all the work put in by Okeanos just to have it stolen away with one final basic attack out of Spadio, making sure that he can secure that one for himself and keep that golden XP lead in their favor, though it is starting to slowly diminish a little bit here. Goodnight Nick are closing up that gold gap. Scorpion does go the way of Goodnight Nick, but Adapting gets pulled in. Destruction cast just the way he has a little bit of immunity. Adapting not going to hit the stun. Ice Ice has got the basics, though, and that'll be a nice little kill onto the jungler.
And that's exactly what you're looking for, is these consistent picks onto the Kali, suppress her as much as possible in the early game, give Ice Ice all the room to operate, and it seems as though Ice Ice even opting to build into that Erendite early on. These cooldowns posing a lot of issues currently for Adapting because he just doesn't have his abilities as often as Ice Ice.
And Terra, I'm going to go back into the solo. Mystical Veil online now for him. We're on to the flip side. Deathwalker has gone for this Breastplate of Valor, give himself a little bit of extra cooldown on that Guan Yu, and Tier 2 Fighter's Mask as well for that early game pressure that he wanted to establish, but unfortunately for him, he had an Adapting show up into his lane and kind of stop that just a little bit. Looking across the board onto it, levels fairly even across the board. Ice Ice with a very slight level lead over Adapting. Wolfie going to get pushed under the tower. Ice Ice jumps off of Suku, but not going to find anybody with that Spectral Jaguar. Not going to be able to get any knock-up onto there for any kind of pull, and Wolfie again pushed right under tower.
It'd be great to see Ice Ice continue trying to utilize that advantage with the cooldown reduction that he currently has, though. Especially when he finishes that Erendite, that's going to be 30% CDR in his favor. And it's certainly enough, I believe. If you're looking to just continuously punish Adapting, he can't use his beads for everything. So I think that Adapting should honestly continue to remain the focus here for Goodnight Nick, because if this Kali has a chance to reach that mid to late game stride, that's where she's going to feel impossible to shut down, I think.
Well, Angry facing down 2 here into the mid lane. Kalos is going to be at the forefront of it, and just now procking over to level 9 onto the Fafnir. Mid camp's coming up, and it looks like that's the main target for Elysium to keep themselves on the board here. And it looks like they may have been able to secure that one. The Sigil pushing Trix Tank away with that fear. And now it's 3 members of Goodnight Nick teamed up into the mid lane. Trix Tank goes in with the root, but nothing further from there. Now Angry may be in a little bit of danger. He can't leap too far away. Knockup is good in the beads just to make sure he can leap away. Kalas gets a transformation, but that's the end of that.
But it's still a win for Ice Ice. He knows that Angry's not going to have those purification beads, and Angry knows that the entirety of Goodnight Nick is well aware that he doesn't have those purification beads, so it might even force Elysium to have to take the back step.
Leap in by Kalas and a double stun onto Angry. He's got no beads and no life. Ice Ice puts him down. Wolfie goes into the ultimate looking for some damage, but not going to find quite enough. Adapting takes about half his health in the midst of the fight as well. Good initiation by Kalas. Sets up for a big kill on Angry.
And really not much left there for Adapting to do other than sit and watch. Trix Tank might have found himself in some trouble as well. Good feather step for the burst damage, but Trix Tank being Terra, gonna escape for the time being. But again, feather step up, 30% cooldown reduction, paying off for Ice Ice big time, and Adapting might even join Trix Tank in the graveyard.
Ice Ice manages to get a Jaguar through the midst of it all. Picks him up under the tower. Now it's Terram in the middle of 3, looking for some big damage. That Mystical Mail and the Van Anger putting some big damage out. Spadio rotates over and picks up one of the kills. Still looking for a second root on the Deathwalker. Terram picks up the double kill into the midst of the fray, and they trade the fight out.
Just when it looks like it's going to be the perfect situation for Goodnight Nick. A devastating rotation, I think, from Spadio and Terram, because they just punish everyone who would have had the possibility to start establishing a real lead. It also gives a great opportunity for Adapting to not have as much pressure as he goes to farm out the entirety of his jungle, and even gives Terram the advantage in terms of looking for a potential blue buff invade in solo.
Well, Kalas low health, has to go back under the tower. Trix Tank not willing to dive under it with Angry. Instead, they'll just clear out the minion wave and maybe look for some camps across the board. Red buff is available, but they're not going to go for the invade. Instead of any camps, they're going to go to the main objective. The Gold Fury started up by Elysium, and with 3 strong onto it, no rotation in just yet. Okeanos on the way. Ice Ice and Wolfie at the red buff, and I say Okeanos is on the way, but he went to the purple buff instead. That's going to be a free Gold Fury going to Elysium.
Okeanos is just being walked around. all of Elysium are primarily just ignoring this Heimdall for the time being. And the other question that I have, J-Mac, is Okeanos even getting a chance to kind of relay to the rest of Goodnight Nick, hey, there's a Chiron rotating in. Hey, their team is on the Gold Fury. Because right now, it's kind of seeming as though Okeanos didn't really know much better either.
Well, with that one, Gold Fury does go the way of Elysium. Now 2,000 gold in their favor. Experience still fairly even across the board. I say that, though, but solo lane has a level and a half. Mid lane's got a half level. It's really only Adapting who's kind of falling behind here on Elysium, and that's because he's been the primary target for Goodnight Nick. They want to shut down this Kali, keep this Kali at bay, make sure that this Kali doesn't make it to late game, but so far, Adapting just seems to be coasting here alongside Elysium.
I think Adapting understands that if all of the kills and all of the lead are on this Awelish, that's not exactly the best case scenario for Goodnight Nick either, because Ice can't do it all, and Wolfie gonna have to retreat to his T1 tower. A nice pull in onto Angry by Ice, but not enough to confirm the kill.
He's got a nice ult for a little bit of damage protection onto that one, but luckily for him, he's able to make it out. Not enough CC and damage to shut down the mid laner just yet. Loses his beads and his Aegis in the process of all of that. So Angry now with no relic defenses available to himself. The next engagement from Goodnight Nick needs to come sooner rather than later. Okeanos barely manages to get into that Bifrost. The Aegis falling off just in time for him to teleport away. And Spudio continuing to establish dominance in this duo lane.
But no beads, no Aegis for this Heimdall now makes him a very vulnerable target for the likes of Adapting if Adapting wishes to give another visit towards that duo lane. However, the time being, though, really want to see Ice try and force some pressure there in mid lane while Angry's relics are on cooldown, because it's one thing to have all the cooldown reduction in the world, J-Mac. It's another to utilize it.
Well, Pyromancer goes the way of Elysium, so they're able to get another objective under their belt and push their gold lead up another 600 or so gold in their favor. Adapting will rotate over just to get some farm by dropping down that blue buff. Still just a little bit behind Ice, but that lead is slowly starting to dwindle away. Goodnight Nick, they're down overall into experience. Their one silver lining is Ice on this Awelish, but, I mean, Taco, when it comes to the late game, what can the Awelish really offer comparatively to something like a Kali?
Not a whole heck of a lot, and that kind of touches back onto what I just brought up in the fact that if you have all of your lead based on only one person in comparison to an entire team that's relevant in farm and gold, then the issue simply becomes, well, we'll just dump 3 to 4 ultimates into Ice, take out the power factor here for Goodnight Nick, and then what are they left with? Because there hasn't really been any sort of follow-up or crazy burst potential as far as this Heimdall is concerned.
Well, Spudio immediately goes into the giddy up, pulled in by the gravity surge and dropped down. Ice with another kill, Adapting on the rotation along with the rest of his team. Duo lane and the mid laner will start walking over, but they're not going to go too much further. Trixtank not wanting to step too far forward, and Ice will now be able to rotate out, and Kalas will be able to go back to the fountain. So another kill on the board for Ice, puts him at 6-1 now. Serrated Edge is finished up and still has room to go inside of his build. 2 more big items available for that jungler.
But Elysium don't really seem to be sweating it all that much. The primary downside there for Spudio is the fact that he invested his purification beat, so now likely won't be able to play nearly as aggressively into Okeanos, because typically when you have beats, you can actually expend them for that Heim ultimate, but without, a little bit more problematic here, just like Ice trying to create a problem for Trixtank in mid.
Trixtank down to a quarter, ult out of Wolfie, not going to do enough damage. Angry going to try and turn some damage back to Elysium, but not going to find much. Ruination just a little bit off the mark there, so they won't find a stun, but luckily for Trixtank, he will be able to make it out of that one without having to expend any of his primary relics. You do see the Cursed Ankh pick up by Trixtank here to counteract a little bit of the healing that will eventually come from Deathwalker, a little bit of the self-heal from Kalas as well.
Everything is kind of just chilling, though, as far as Elysium are concerned. Sure, they're losing a couple of members here and there, but it's only ever one pick at a time. And that's another issue I think that's posed with this Goodnight Nick composition, is that there is so much emphasis being placed on the single target pick style of play for this draft that if they don't find that beneficial pick at the start of an engagement, then I have some concerns in terms of that counterpunch from Elysium, because there is a lot well-rounded off here in terms of AoE, in terms of space control, and just the ability for Elysium, I think, to have a little bit more of that flank threat as well because of adapting on the Kali.
Well, Trix Tank gonna get stunned. Ruination over the wall from Angry zones Ice away from trying to further engage onto the support. And we've seen this out of Elysium time and time again. Sure, we may not have won this immediate early game, but we're hitting the mid-game stride now, and that's where we begin to excel. So they're more than fine taking these slow games, these slow early on fights, because all they need to do is wait for that moment when they can pull the trigger and activate the bomb that is the late game team fighting out of Elysium.
Listen, when you're the team with the Kali, you don't really care about how slow the early to mid game goes. If anything, you're just like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. But Goodnight Nick now trying to take advantage of some of that early game pressure that Ice has been able to provide on the Awalish, transitioning over into the mid game. But Primal Fury going to be picked up and dropped almost immediately after, and Elysium didn't even have a full team response taking place there. But it seems as though Goodnight Nick might be a little bit more interested in the overall team fight, maybe trying to shift their attention towards that Fire Giant off a successful win in an engagement.
Well, they saw that Angry had backed into the mid lane, and that's the trigger for Kalas to go up into the Draconic form, start up that Fury, and now Angry on rotation through Elysium manages to steal away the Gold Fury, and Tarim and Trix Tank go in. Kalas stuck in the middle of them, finally able to get that leap off just to get back to safety. Now Ice on full retreat along with Deathwalker. Monolith comes out, it's only going to catch Ice in place. Tarim still running forward into that rage transformation. Now he's got to retreat because he took a little too much damage. Ice with the Feather Step, but Tarim's still alive. Nobody was able to clinch out the solo later, and instead it's adapting, running into the back line. The Bifrost will keep him alive for only a short while, but it's a double kill out of Angry, and still looking for more as he turns his sights towards Angry under the tier 2 tower.
Angry still trying to chase Wolfie down through in between his T1 and T2 towers, and Wolfie, he's got nowhere left to run. Spuddy will get the last hit credit for that one. Adapting doesn't get the bonus passive play, but at the same time, J-Mac, it is a 4-for-nothing wipe in response for Goodnight Nick, and they were the ones that had originally pulled the Gold Fury, so to lose it in such a quick fashion and then immediately be collapsed on after the fact, that just goes to showcase a lot of the pressure that I think this Elysium composition has with that Kali, and adapting wasn't even the main focus point in that engagement.
Yeah, and Tarim not falling there is probably the biggest kind of stab in the back onto that one, as they thought they got this solo laner. He was so low in HP, but they still didn't manage to pick him up. Tarim with just a little too much HP and just a little too much backup onto his team. We're going to get you guys back into this game very shortly. Hopefully we'll be able to quickly get through this little pause that's going through onto that one and jump right back into it. But, I mean, Goodnight Nick, great idea. Pull the Gold Fury. They've got the 5v4 advantage. Kalas goes up into the Dragon form, and then Tarim walks forward and just nabs the Gold Fury from right under their feet.
Yeah, as far as objective shred is concerned, there's clearly plenty of it for Goodnight Nick. I mean, they burned that Gold Fury, or the Primal Fury, in no time at all. It was really just an issue of who's got the ultimate confirmation here, because if you invest the Feather Step or even the Morgan Le Fay, that's not exactly consistent or guaranteed confirmation. Not actually certain what stole it there for Elysium. Could have been Spudio with that Chiron ultimate. Could have also been adapting, because I know that he was relatively close at the time of the engagement, but either way, to lose the Primal Fury and then immediately lose the team fight after the fact when it looked like such a promising initiation for, or counter initiation for Goodnight Nick, because it seemed for a second there that Elysium had simply dove too deep. Terror Rim got destroyed the moment that he pushed forward, and it's just, it is definitely a little bit of a mental blow there for Goodnight Nick to lose back-to-back in the double whammy.
And just when they had kind of kept this game even, sitting around that 2K threshold, back and forth there for almost 18 minutes of this game, one little objective is all it took for Elysium to now spiral this game back completely into their control. Nearly 6,000 gold up, and they're going to go right onto the Fire Giant. Deathwalker doesn't have an opportunity to jump back in. Angry gets pulled in by the Gravity Surge, uses the beads quickly under the Feather Step just to keep himself going. Trix Tank holding on to the Fire Giant. They're going to leash it immediately and turn their sights towards Ice, who walked a little too far into the backline. Kalas transforms, but it's Wolfie in danger. He'll be dashed onto by Tarum and taken down. Spudio with a big double kill. Kalas manages to pick up Trick's tank amongst it all, but now adapting is found. Kalas sitting in the back line. Okeanos nowhere to be found for the rest of Goodnight Nick, and Elysium can turn their sights back to the Fire Giant.
Okeanos only managing to escape thanks to the beauty of that Bifrost. However, when you lose your entire team in the process, and it's evident, this late game Kali is now fully on the line here, J-Mac. And adapting, he knows he doesn't even need to assist his team with the confirmation on this Fire Giant. He's on the hunt right now for Okeanos.
Adapting, still looking for him. Will, more than willing, dive him under the Phoenix, preemptively pops the destruction and blinks on into the Phoenix, picks him up and gets a delayed deicide here for Elysium. Tier 1 tower right side down. Tier 2 tower now being looked at by Elysium, and that very tight-knit lead that Elysium had earlier on is now spiraling out of control.
Easily the worst case scenario here for Goodnight Nick, because now if Elysium wants, they could try to push for a Phoenix, but seems as though the team a little bit more content to just back and buy and spend up all that gold that they just acquired from both the successful engagement, the T2 tower bounty, as well as that Fire Giant in general. So Elysium sitting pretty here now. And what was once just a 1,500, 1,700 gold lead at best has now exploded into 10,000 gold in Elysium's favor.
And 15,000 experience as well, and some of that still very relevant experiences. Not everybody on the board has hit level 20 yet. In fact, only Okeanos has hit level 20 onto the flip side of it. So, yeah, well, now Ice just now procking into it, as I say, as they always do. As soon as you make a point on somebody's level, somebody hasn't done something, they go ahead and do it. And now Ice is going to be under fire from Trick's tank as he'll take a little bit of damage. The minion goes through. Bubble is still up for Ice, but the bubble does not save you from damage. Tarum and Angry team up and take down the jungler. Now, Kalas has to leap away. Tarum gets a root onto Okeanos into the back. Warcry and one more basic will be enough. Tarum picks up the double kill and takes down the Hunter and immediately set their sights towards the Phoenix.
Says a lot when your team doesn't even need to be fully grouped in order to have the advantage here. Goodnight Nick just crumbling at every single aspect right now into this Elysium pressure. And again, J-Mac, I think this really all funnels back to that initial Primal Fury pool. Just too much forfeited for Goodnight Nick when they lost that engagement and the objective steal.
Full minion thrown out to slow down Kalas and force him back towards the fountain. First Phoenix on the left side down, middle Phoenix taken away, and very quickly after the third one will drop down as well, and Elysium will take that time to back away, maybe spend up some of that gold as they've now stripped every single tower and Phoenix off the board, so no structures left to defend against this now very weak Titan with all the defenses off the map onto it. Not a lot of health sitting on that final objective.
One upside, though, for Goodnight Nick is that their primary carries have all of their relics readily available again. That was something that I think was sorely missed out on in a lot of these past engagements for Goodnight Nick. It's just carries kind of being whittled away at just because they didn't have an Aegis or they didn't have the Purification Beast to try and escape from this crazy chase down dive that Elysium has been consistently forcing against the likes of Goodnight Nick.
Ice probably wishes he had more than just a bubble in that last fight, as unfortunately for him, that bubble doesn't help him against slows, and doesn't help him against damage either onto it, as there was just a little too much of both on the side of Elysium for that jungler to handle. All three Phoenixes down, and Goodnight Nick are out and about farming into the jungle. They got everybody on that right side looking near the speed buff. Kalas gets rooted out by Trick's tank, who's going to try and slow Wolfie down while the rest of Elysium start pushing towards the throne room. But all 5 members from Goodnight Nick are up. I say that, Adapting goes in. Wolfie immediately into the ultimate to respond. Adapting pops to destruction, looking for Ice, and Adapting will manage to get the kill onto it. First one down. Spudio picks up Wolfie, but now he's in a bit of danger. I say that, but that's a double kill for the Hunter. Kalas and Deathwalker, the only ones left alive, are the frontliners, and there's not enough defense and enough damage to save that Titan from him. Elysium will take game number 1.
A pretty commanding force for Elysium there in game 1, J-Matt, because it did look as though for a second there, Ice alongside the rest of Goodnight Nick was going to be able to create enough pressure to really pack so much of a punch in the early game that he keeps adapting from ever really getting to be a participant. But everyone else from Elysium just seemed to step up after the fact, and they're like, hey, not my jungler.
All it took was one little team 5-4, and Elysium able to come out on top with game number 1. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back to get ready for game 2.
Woke up with no plans, what I'ma do today. These are not the same, I got new shoes today. My baby missed me, wishing it was two of me. And I'm like, if I'm not doing it's the real deal. I've been up and down Pharaoh. Friend, bro, you did a real kill. Off the liquor and some pill pills. I've been at it since a church. Told little baby, make it twerk. Twerk. Go crazy, go crazy. Bro, pass me the rock. I've been moving out the box. Top speed going top. 101 going pop. Getting hot. In the paint, never flop. At the rim like who? Get the crown like Brian. Yeah. Make it some and I'm spending some. What's the plan? Bet I get it done. It's me, yeah, neighborhood. It's me, yeah, give me some. Wifey icy, yeah, freeze up. New friends, I don't need them. Checks coming by the spins. Kids eating off the reruns. If I'm not doing it's the real deal. I've been up and down Pharaoh. Friend, bro, you did a real kill. Off the liquor and some pill pills. I've been at it since a church. Told little baby, make it twerk. Twerk. Go crazy, go crazy.
Elysium, with a bit of a slow burn in the early game, managed to bring it home in just shy of 25 minutes for themselves, and managed to get their first win here over Accounting Department. I keep saying Accounting Department. That's what I've known them as. That's what they were so famous on. On to Goodnight Nick here in phase number 2, their first matchup onto it. J-Mac and Taco join me yet again for this one. Goodnight Nick, they had the right idea in the early game. Play it a little bit slower, go to the late game, fight Elysium where they're not comfortable, except Elysium doesn't care where you're comfortable because they're comfortable at all stages of the game.
If anything, I was definitely impressed by the way Goodnight Nick brought themselves back into contention of that early to mid game, because when you lose your duo lane, both members, by the way, for the first blood double kill advantage for Elysium's duo lane, and then on top of that, Terrorim, getting a slight advantage against Deathwalker thanks to a nice gank out of adapting early on. It's tough to recover that, and Goodnight Nick somehow managed to push through it. Ice just came to life on this Awilish. The entire team for Goodnight Nick was really just trying to play as much around Ice as possible, but I think some other heads-up rotations from Elysium to kind of counteract some of that recovery phase for Goodnight Nick, and we never really saw anybody else aside from Ice really benefiting in that early to mid-game for Goodnight Nick, and I think that was ultimately their downfall because Elysium's composition, it was designed for the mid to late game, and they just happened to have an advantage in the early.
And a lot of it coming off thanks to the back of this man right here, Terram, a menace not just into the solo lane, but in these team fights as well. That Gold Fury, huge 3-4-man knockup that he was able to get while engaging onto them, and then just constant pressure, not letting off the gas pedal for an instant. It only shows 5-1 onto there, but it felt like he was 15-1 with how he was playing that mid game.
You would have expected it, at least, with how far up and aggressive Terrorim was able to facilitate just about every single aspect of gameplay in that mid to late game stage. And top of the charts as far as damage is concerned, Wolfie as well, surprisingly, 17,000 just about. 16,999, 17,000 damage. I don't care what anybody says.
Nope, it's one less. It's not there.
But Wolfie, I don't think that the Morgan Le Fay wasn't the issue by any means, but at the same time, I don't really think that we ever really got to see a chance for that Morgan Le Fay to even prosper. It just felt so one-sided for Elysium after they got that Primal Fury steal into the team fight wipe just about, because 4 members dying, I mean, you don't want a situation where only one person's ever alive at a time on your team.
Well, we're going to jump ahead right into picks and bans for game number 2 and see if maybe we can make some adjustments here for Goodnight Nick and see if maybe they can take a couple of shots here at Elysium. But that's kind of one of the problems with a lot of these teams in the SCC, especially a lot of these top teams, is it just seems that their god pool is almost infinite. You think you got Adapting Lockdown. All right, we took away his Fenrir. All right, we took away, X, Y, or Z onto him, but then he says, okay, I'll just play Kali, or okay, I'll just play this. And it just seems that you really can't ban out a lot of these top SCC teams.
I just think that there are certain players, when they have as much tenure as the likes of Adapting, it's probably not all that worthwhile to specifically try and isolate them as far as bans are concerned. I'd like the Fenrir ban, though, either way for Goodnight Nick, because that doesn't feel like it's exclusive to Adapting. I think that that's a nice flex pick that Elysium could benefit off of in general, but as far as Goodnight Nick is concerned, I think that it might be best for them to try and shift their attention elsewhere, and I like this switch up, taking away that Earthen Fury possibility for Tricksting. I do feel we saw a lot of Tricksting in the early game. We kind of stopped talking about him for that mid to late because it was the Adapting Terrorim show by that point, but I do feel like Tricksting's performance with that Terra throughout the early game, he had such impactful steals as well, was able to apply a lot of map pressure just by himself, and I think that it was a wise decision from Goodnight Nick to take away the Terra, but again, you leave Angry open for the Tiamat.
Yeah, and after a performance they had on it, a little bit of a rough early patch for him onto the Tiamat, but able to bring that one back around and really keep them into the game. And I mean, overall, it's a Tiamat. I mean, we can't talk about this god enough with how much Tiamat has been able to offer, not just for mid laners, but for the team as a whole, being able to have such a safe mid laner, such a heavy damage and heavy CC mid laner onto their roster for it. And again, Goodnight Nick are going to pick up the same gods they picked up in the first game. It's going to be the Heimdall and the Fafnir. So far, the only thing that's changed in this picks and bans is instead of banning the Fenrir, they banned a Terra.
Yeah, but solidifying the dual lane, I don't hate this for Goodnight Nick by any means, but if you're going to go back to the Heimdall and the Fafnir, you can't afford to get double kill first blooded in that early game. And it was off the first creep wave as well, where we saw Kalis and Okeanos kind of getting better or just simply outplayed really by the likes of Elysium. However, Elysium, not only did they get the Tiamat, because of that Terra ban having been a switch up there for Goodnight Nick, which again, I don't fault them for, but taking Kakolin and Fenrir, this is such an aggressive early game draft yet again.
Does it feel a little early to be locking in the Awilish on the side of Goodnight Nick, or is this kind of like the perfect spot for it because they've already got their 3 leapers on the board?
I think Ice is really just trying to bank off the fact of, look, I had a great start in the early to mid game, and that was despite us not having the greatest side lane outcomes to work with in that early game. So maybe the Awilish is there purely intended just to try and harass Adapting as much as possible.
Well, we'll see where they continue to put their pressure on. It will be 2 Hunters banned away here, Chiron and Cupid on the side of Goodnight Nick, where Bologna will be banned away for the side of Elysium, keeping that one out of Deathwalker's hands. Probably one of the few players who really just forced a god back into the meta was Deathwalker onto this Bologna specifically with it. And then a Hades ban?
That's another Deathwalker ban.
Okay.
That's another Deathwalker shout out of, hey, we know what you're capable of. We don't want to see it today.
Well, when see it today, we will not, thanks to Goodnight Nick. Not going to be able to pick that one up. Elysium banning it away. And a Mulan picked up here. Now, if it weren't for the Fafnir locked in, I would love to say I would love to see this Mulan go into support. But with Fafnir locked in, that's probably not going to happen. So, is this Mulan more flex towards the support or the solo lane, or are we going to see this jungle?
I think we have to see Mulan in the solo lane. I would not want to see Mulan in the jungle up against the likes of a Fenrir. I also am not really... I don't know about this Mulan support spiel that you might be on.
Look, it's nuts.
I feel like you're riding high on Mulan, and this is a god where she can do a lot of damage. Don't get me wrong. But aside from that, I don't really know what more she really offers here, so maybe Deathwalker looking to just try and run it down in the early game, see if he can look for a solo opportunity up against Terrorim and look to establish a lead that way.
Okay, look, so here's what you do. You get Mulan support. You get on her. As soon as you hit level 2, you get grapple. Whoever you grapple, if they don't use their beads, they're dead because they get grappled into a pillar stun, and then they're just dead. That's it.
But then you're
that's
also
the spiel.
Mulan for an entire Smite game, and then you're just dead. That's usually the outcome. Mulan is... I'm sorry. I mean, shout-outs to Sam for trying to make her work as far as the Smite Pro League is concerned, but I definitely think Mulan is more so at bottom of the charts if there's like a competitive tier list for her.
Well, we will be seeing the Mulan, though, and it will be a solo Mulan onto it. They do have the Awilish and the Fafnir already locked in. Morgan Le Fay to round out the draft. She just kind of got forgot about because... it's more important to ban Deathwalker here and put him onto something less comfortable, you would say. Maybe putting him, as you said, somewhere a little bit lower in the charts as far as this Mulan goes.
It's fair, though, given the fact that Wolfie had Morgan Le Fay last game, and we didn't really see a whole lot out of it. And that's not to say that it was Wolfie exclusively that was the problem by any means. It's more so just the fact that Goodnight Nick never really had an avenue to really play through this Morgan Le Fay. And as far as things are concerned for that duo lane, though, J-Mac, a pretty steep switch up here for the likes of Elysium. Trixtank now on that Sobek, Spudio with the ROM. And this feels like a much more intimidating duo lane for Collis and Okeanos to fare with in comparison to Game 1's composition.
Well, as we jump into game number 1, we do see Deathwalker pick up that fighter's mask for his first item over into the solo lane. Doug will be once again spectating for us on the battleground, so shoutouts to Doug. And make sure to throw your Dougs in the chat for him, as we all love Doug out here, and we love what he does for us onto this camera. Rarely ever does he have a misstep onto here. We usually get to see all the nice kills onto it. So let's see where this first blood draws through, or maybe should we take an over/under on time for first blood onto this? I'm gonna say 6 minutes 45 seconds.
That's very specific.
Over/under. No, that's like our baseline. Do we see over/under on that point?
I'm gonna say under.
Okay.
I'm gonna say under just because Elysium's duo lane did get the first blood in the first creep wave. And this is also a dual lane. I can see you getting a first blood in the first creep wave.
Well, we might be seeing it here. Spudio under fire, but luckily hits level 2, so he's got that roll. But they will be losing the horrific emblem onto this one, so a little bit of a trade out onto that. Trixtank looking for a potential pluck, but he's not level 2 quite yet, so he'll have to wait until this wave before he's able to get that action going. Adapting rotates into mid. We'll immediately get the leap onto Wolfie. Some nice damage through Ruination. Not quite enough. And the Brutalize not enough damage. Good knock-up. Adapting falls. First blood. Just around a minute here for Wolfie.
Did it matter which side got it, or was it just about...
No, it was just when it happened.
Okay.
It was just when it happened.
Fair enough. Well, it seems as though Elysium, they're the ones that are trying to be the aggressors here, J-Mag, and they're going to get turned upon entirely. Adapting, I don't think, necessarily respecting all that minion damage that was being provided in the creep wave on top of the ability damage out of Ice and Wolfie.
Yeah, and unfortunately, once he got out of that Brutalize, just needed one more basic attack after, but perfect timing by Ice gets the Jaguar off, able to get the knock-up onto it and stop him dead in his tracks, and able to pick up first blood this time in the hands of Wolfie, where previously it did go over to that dual lane there for Elysium, and I really did think we were going to see that first blood fall into duo, but Adapting had other plans.
Adapting said, hey, my turn. That's really all it boils down to for the Fenrir pick. But even still, despite that first blood happening for Wolfie, doesn't really seem as though it's funneled all that much into an experienced lead just yet. And in fact, Terrorim actually posing a lot of problems here for Deathwalker. One of the sacrifices you make with taking this fighter's mask is, yes, it can make you incredibly strong in the early laning phase, but if you're not able to actually establish any pressure with it, then you're just super susceptible to ganks and being kind of just walked down, especially by the likes of a Kakolin.
Yeah, I mean, Adapting just got tired of being on the farm game. When you play at Kali and you willingly have to just give up all of your fighting potential, and especially for a guy like Adapting, like he normally loves playing these more early-centric, just fight-heavy gods, Fenrir dating all the way back to some of his Worlds runs as well. I mean, when you have to give him the Kali, he comes into Game 2, he gets a Fenrir, of course he's going to want to fight. He's not on Kali this time.
Hard not to want to run it down, that is for sure. But Adapting, even still, I don't think he's really all that deterred from trying to be a centerpiece for aggression here for Elysium. Despite having died early on, he can definitely still look to be proactive, I think, in that mid lane territory, and possibly even looking for some jungle buff invades, although it is a little bit more problematic for a Fenrir in comparison to the Kali. Kali having her ultimate that gives her a little bit more survivability, but Fenrir, on the other hand, if he's off timing with an Unchained or a Brutalize and Ice is on his timing, then that could also prevent a lot of burst damage coming out of Adapting in the early game.
Trickstank gonna get a pluck on the Kalas, and a little bit of follow-up damage there. Nice ruination there. Out of Angry, we'll get some good damage onto the support, and with the Typhoon being thrown out, Wolfie will have to walk back under the tower. Trickstank not quite level 5 just yet, though. That lurking in the water is not a massive team fight-centric ultimate onto it. Mostly a little bit of mana regen. Can do a decent amount of damage, so I think some people sleep at the fact of how much damage some of these Guardians can do, like a Ymir ult or even a Sobek ult.
And Trickstank, I think, is well aware. He has been piloting the Sobek for many years now, J-Mac, and to see him here with it again in the Smite Challenger circuit is always a bit of a treat, as Okeanos, maybe a little unsuspecting, that is until Kalis will spot out Trickstank, and now it's actually going to draw the attention of Ice, who's thinking about potentially ganking the dual lane, but seems as though Elysium knows better. They'll fall back to their side of the map, a little bit more safety in tow as well.
Deathwalker just going to have to willingly give up that blue buff. Terram rotates over and Adapting as well, just to get that extra little bit of XP for it. So blue buff will be stripped away from the solo laner for Goodnight Nick, and a bit unfortunate for him. He definitely needs it a lot more than Terram does, being on that Kakulin, so it's going to be a little bit of a blow to him, but doesn't seem like Deathwalker's too deterred. He's going to go into the Sundering Axe, or not the Sundering Axe, but the Warrior's Axe for his first item onto. Hold that though, pluck out of Trickstank, and a nice little shot will keep him out of the Bifrost just long enough. And Spudio able to get a nice little turnaround kill here onto Okeanos.
That was a beautiful tail whip as well from Trickstank. Angry, however, going to be in some problems. A nice attempt from Wolfie to try and prevent Angry from looking for that escape, but Angry procced the Purification Beads in advance, knowing that he did not want to be a victim of a gravity surge from Ice.
Ice waiting in the wings for Terram to step forward and may be able to at least claim something off this side of the map. He'll go make his way towards those back Harpies and drop those down very quickly, but Elysium, they're down about 700 gold so far. Not just that first blood bounty, but a little bit extra on top of that Goodnight Nick has been able to pull a lead. Terram, unknowing of Ice being on this side, he'll turn over towards him, gonna leap away, and Ice not gonna pull the trigger on that gravity surge.
It's a fairly quick leap there on that salmon leap for the Kakolin, so I understand some of the difficulties. I can relate Ice for being a little bit slow there on that gravity surge attempt, or he didn't even attempt it, so I can't even say attempt, but understanding that Ice might not have expected him to just look for that leap outright right in front of him.
With that Spudio, now with that first kill over into the dual lane for him, he's got that wave pressure over Okeanos, and he'll force him back just a little bit. Deathwalker with no blue buff, no way to sustain his mana. He's going to be forced back under tower, while Spudio and Elysium as a whole able to control both the Forp and the Gorp, making sure to strip those ones away off the map. Kalas and Ice Ice over here by the blue buff will be picked up successfully, but Adapting is going to pick up Ice Ice in the process of it. Draconic Transformation, a quick beads leap away, but Wolfie was waiting for Adapting on the back end of that leap and will be able to pick him up for his second kill. Now Tarum pushed away by the Dragonfly, but gets a nice root onto Wolfie. However, he's got to fight into the midst of all of them. The Feather Step will make sure that the War Cry gets nullified, and 3 kills on the board for Goodnight Nick. Maybe more if they can find Trix Tank here off the stunts from Kalas.
This was just Elysium playing against the numbers into Goodnight Nick here. Angry finally going to make his debut from the mid lane. He just was not available and prepared for that rotation into the solo buff invade, and well, Elysium definitely get appropriately punished by Goodnight Nick for it. After the fact, Adapting maybe gonna start being a little bit more mindful in terms of what Ice Ice is actually able to do with this Awelish in the early game.
It's Adapting. You're telling me he's gonna try and be calm about everything? Nah, there's no way. No way Adapting is just gonna lie down taking this one. He's gonna be ready and raring to go for those fights, and immediately jumps into the mid lane, picks up his kill, taking down Wolfie.
That Seething Howl proc into the Unchained and Brutalize, all that physical power bonus that Adapting is receiving on his abilities, but he'll get punished on the back end. However, Ice Ice pulling Adapting off the knockup means that he could try and look for the Unchained escape, but a great catch out by Kalas with that Fafnir Hammer is going to prevent the real escape for Adapting, and a nice Feather Step follow-up to close the deal. So, sure, Wolfie dies, but Adapting trades out his life in the process.
And I'll put him down to 1 and 3 now onto the jungler. No difference than we saw in last game. This time, though, it's a Fenrir versus a Kali, who's a little bit more prone for his early fighting. So, not the best startup here from Adapting, but at least we're still seeing signs of light out of him. Despite the 2 deaths, he's still willing to jump under that tier 1 tower to go for those kills. He's still looking to fight into opponents that have more golden XP on the map than him, who have been outscaling him so far.
More importantly, though, we're seeing great responses out of Goodnight Nick. I mean, Elysium, they didn't even get more than one opportunity to look for that blue buff invade. A 4-man rotation, a 4-man investment, I should say, from Goodnight Nick. And in the process, they get everything that you could ask for, which is simply just killing the members of Elysium one by one. It's not so much about the staggered respawn timers, because right now it's so early in the game, J-Mac, that that's kind of irrelevant because everybody's going to be respawning relatively quickly, but it's that prevention of farm, and I'd like to see Goodnight Nick look for a little bit more after the fact when they find those successful picks in the counter initiation. Maybe try and be a little bit more proactive in terms of trying to like take down these T1 towers in mid and solo.
Adapting. He picked up a red buff on an invade earlier, so that speed buff not going to be able to be picked up by him, actually. So a little bit of movement down for him, but I'm sure he's fine trading some power for a little bit of movement speed onto it. Meanwhile, onto the left-hand side, Draugr does go the way of Goodnight Nick, so they're able to pick up one of the mini objectives onto the map. Trix Tank and Angry will be able to at least trade out 1-for-1 on those mid lane Harpies. Make sure to split those down the middle with Goodnight Nick.
And Trix Tank, his sole duty right now is just to try and babysit Angry. Does not want to leave his mid laner alone currently. Goodnight Nick have already proven that they are willing to try and get up in Angry's face with this Awelish, just looking to pull those purification beads as often as possible to try and create an opportunity for a pick opportunity.
They were looking towards Spudio, or I should say Spudio was looking towards Goodnight Nick, but not too deterred from stepping around into this duo lane. He'll stick at that midway point, and Ice Ice on the way back over to see if he can get anything off a rotation, but Spudio not going to walk too far forward. Luck out of Trix Tank, going to be a little bit off the mark. Said full minion will come through from Angry, just to slow down Kalas a little bit. And Deathwalker, despite not really having the most fun over here into the solo lane, everybody keeps stealing his buffs and causing fights over onto this side. He's got a little bit of an experience lead over Terrorum, able to keep himself alive onto this Mulan.
On the one hand, Deathwalker consistently getting invaded and ran at. On the other hand, when you have several members and more at times for Goodnight, or for Elysium splitting farm, it's going to give a slight edge for Deathwalker, since he's practically solo farming in response. But speaking of these buff invades, Adapting one more time, going to take away that red buff from Wolfie.
Not just a red buff, an enhanced red buff as well, because that Scorpion did fall earlier on, so a big little power spike there for the jungler. We'll see if he can make use of that red buff, but for now, he'll make his way back to base and go ahead and start dropping down some of the camps yet again. A much more attack speed oriented build on adapting this time around. First with the Iqval, now going for the Berserker Shield as well.
And I think that this can definitely complement Fenrir, given the fact that Fenrir has an option between going hybrid, tanky, or just all-out aggressive, and adapting having opted for that Iqval early on leads me to believe that he just wants to box it out with Ice whenever Ice is trying to get aggressive into this Fenrir and looking to leverage, because you don't want to put all of your focus onto your Unchained and Brutalize when those can be interrupted by the likes of a Gravity Surge and by the likes of a Feather Step. So by shifting to a more auto attack based build, Adapting gives himself a better option, I think, to kind of negate the pressure that Ice would have otherwise had for free.
Kalot's going to rotate over to help out Okeanos on some clear and get a little bit of farm for himself. Gone into a Hide the Urchin second item, where the flip side, Trixtank has gone into a Pridwin for his second. Both of them immediately after that Gauntlet of Thebes. Interesting to see Urchin so early on into the build. Interesting, I would say, just to see Urchin in general.
Collis may be hoping that with the way that Goodnight Nick have been playing so far, that there is a chance for these Urchin stacks to actually rain through in his favor. All he needs is a few for the item to pay off. And Ice, he tried to be aggressive with Angry, instead gets plucked in the process, so he'll be forced to fall back on the likes of Suku. However, it's simply just kind of fizzling out here for Goodnight Nick. I'm not going to say they ran out of steam by any means, but Elysium just seemed to be getting the better hand of the map control.
Trixtank immediately turns around so the Jaguar doesn't knock him up, and Tarum has now joined the fight. Wolfie takes a nice little chunk of damage there from Angry, and earlier on, Trixtank had a sick pluck there onto the jungle to make sure that his mid laner didn't get pulled in by that Gravity Surge, but he's going to get the Dragon Transformation out of Kalos. He's looking for anybody he can. Tarum goes into the backline, gets a 4-man knockup with that ult, but it's not going to be enough for him. Leap in for Adapting, and he'll take down Wolfie. Now Kalos going to be picked up by the Ragnarok ultimate and dropped away from the rest of his team. Gets a stun just onto Adapting. Spin comes through, but Deathwalker and Spudio able to trade another 1-for-1. Angry in trouble now as he has to run from Deathwalker, but Spudio is pumping the basics into a double kill on the board for the solo laner, but now he's got to run. He doesn't have those thorns anymore, so Spudio has free reign of the basics to try and jump into him. And unfortunately for Deathwalker, he's not able to get back to the tower. Nice heal from the spear thrust. We'll make sure that he stays alive, but the tier 1 tower now under siege.
Actually a fat heal off of that spear thrust for Deathwalker, but the team fight has already been established, and it's Elysium who comes out on top in the end. Not only that, but their Hunter managing to survive now opens things up for Spudio, having a 3-level gap between himself and Okeanos. This Heim has just had so many issues throughout Game 1 and now Game 2, J-Mac, of just being able to fully utilize that Bifrost. I think Trixtank just doing a great job at preventing that Heim from ever having an opportunity to escape.
Look at the level disparity between the Hunters as well. Even though it's 2 kills on the board for Spudio, he's amounted a 3-level lead over Okeanos, who, as you mentioned, just hasn't been able to really perform into the fights. He's good on using those Bifrost to get out of the fights, but as far as the actual fights have gone themselves, it seems that Okeanos isn't putting up the same level of damage that Spudio is.
No, and I don't think it has anything to do with the builds either. I think it's simply just the fact that when it comes to toggling the target focus, Elysium seems to be one step ahead of Goodnight Nick every single time. Goodnight Nick so disjointed oftentimes. You'll see several different members hitting several different targets, and they need to just try and channel all of their aggression onto one, but a lot of that I think is just going to be calls coming out of the front line. So we're looking towards Deathwalker, we're looking towards Kalas and Ice, I think, to be the primary ones controlling how the team fights funnel out.
And where we see the 3-level disparity from the Hunters, we're also seeing that same disparity into the solo lane. So there's where our XP kind of fizzles out amongst the leads go, as Deathwalker has picked up a 3-level lead on the Mulan. We haven't talked a whole lot about this Mulan outside of the picks and bans, and I guess from all the times that he's been invaded onto that side, but we really haven't been saying Deathwalker's name so much this game.
No, Deathwalker hasn't really had too much of an opportunity to try and be a power play impactor. I mean, he's got the level leads, but he can't actually transition them into promising kills or picks for his team just because Goodnight Nick have just not really been able to collapse as a single unit, which is why I like seeing this aggressive group up now in the mid lane. They know they just lost the Gold Fury. Elysium not even feeling remotely threatened, despite having the Oracle Vision telegraphing to Goodnight Nick the entire time, hey, we're on this objective, do something about it.
And Elysium able to pick up that Gold Fury and finally establish a little bit of a lead for themselves. But Goodnight Nick have a good response in that. They get the tier 1 tower so they can strip 500 gold off the map from them, and now they make their response on towards the Pyromancer as well and effectively negate the lead that Elysium had just built for themselves and bring it back down to a dead even gold game experience. Still a little back and forth onto it, about 2,800 here in favor of Elysium, but that gold basically sitting dead even.
Gold is not really going to be much of a concern for a team like Elysium either, given that they do have a little bit more of that late game advantage, just simply breaking it down between the Hunter alone. Spudio on this ROM, I think should be the primary candidate for Goodnight Nick to be looking to take out right now, because he has been one of the prime surviving candidates throughout these long-term engagements, and if a ROM is able to free cast this much, it's just so problematic.
Trickstank blinks into the midst and is able to get a pluck on a Kalos to throw him away from the mid laner. Wolfie under fire, and Adapting will be the one who strikes him out and gets the kill onto the board for Elysium. So now Wolfie gone. Kalos throws out the hammer, but not going to find anyone. Sights may have been set towards Okeanos. He walks towards the jungle, spots out Adapting into the Bifrost. He'll go back to the safety of the tower.
But this is something that we've been seeing over and over again from Okeanos, just him constantly on the retreat here, and it seems as though his retreat is not yet over because Bifrost still on cooldown, Purification Beads, and the ultimate, or excuse me, Purification Beads is not going to be used, just simply just that high ult, but even still, dead before his team even has a chance to respond.
Kalas is so low in health. Again, it's a nice little pull from Ice Ice to save his life, but Ice Ice may have given up his own in the process. And luckily for him, he's able to leap off of Suku and get back to the tier 1 or tier 2 tower there. Same for Kalas, also barely managing to scrape by as all their attention diverted over towards the jungler, but now their sights are set onto the tier 2 tower, their primary objective amongst that fight. And they'll be able to take that one down and add a little bit more gold to the pockets of Elysium.
It just doesn't really seem as though Okeanos has really been given much opportunity to perform here in both games 1 and 2 now, J-Mac. I'm not sure if it's him being left out on an island or what, but this Heim pick has just not really worked out the greatest for him. And not only that, but when Trickstank first shows his face, that's when you use the Heim ultimate to escape. You don't wait until you have 3 members surrounding you to then be like, oh, let me see if I can get one of these guys out from in front of me. It's just, I don't know. It's definitely doesn't seem as though Okeanos really understands what kind of threat he's facing in a given circumstance.
I mean, Trickstank showing his face, that's throwing the base of the wall up saying, okay, we're about to start collapsing, we're about to start getting this wall up in front of you. And they said, oh, okay, you know what, it's not a problem yet. The wall's not there to stop me just yet. And then 2 more people show up and the wall is already fully established. It's now formally made of concrete, and there's no way you're going to be batting that one down with those puny axes that just aren't hitting hard enough for you. Okeanos gonna fall down in that fight over there, not using a single relic, waiting to use that through the realms until he was already surrounded, and now Angry is the one who's surrounded into the mid lane, stun onto Deathwalker, and some nice damage out of the solo laner. We'll put him in the dirt there. Nice ultimate out of Deathwalker, takes him down, but now he's down to half, gets a grapple onto Adapting, yanking him back in, and that's a double kill for the solo laner. Tear him into the back line. Not able to do much through the realms used by Okeanos to throw him out of place, but Deathwalker is the one caught the heal, not quite enough. Spudio picks up 1. Deathwalker does fall. It's now a 3-for-1. Spudio down to half health, not able to get the final shot as Wolfie takes him down with the wildfire.
And this is just seeming like Deathwalker versus the world right now. He's going to make up for the damage that the rest of his team can't really seem to find in the process, but Trickstank doesn't want to let an opportunity go here for Goodnight Nick to look towards that fire giant, understanding that the surviving members of Goodnight Nick are low enough that I think the Sobek could definitely pose enough of a concern that Goodnight Nick might not even be able to take this FG after a successful team fight.
No ultimate from Kalos, no relics up either. Both of those on cooldown from the last fight, so this Fire Giant going to be a little bit slow of a burn for it. Ice and Okeanos on top. Sunder thrown onto Kalos to play a bit of disruption here for Trixtank, waiting for the rest of his team to show up. Lurking in the waters, goes through. Fire Giant still under siege. Aegis used, pluck, throws Okeanos out of the ring of fire. Trixtank still alive and healthy. He's able to kill Kalos in the process, and now maybe Elysium able to steal away this Fire Giant if they wish to, or they may just ignore it entirely. They're going for the kills. Adapting picks up one. Wolfie fairly healthy into the backline, but not for much longer. Trixtank throws him, but Wolfie able to trade him out. Uses the Aegis, but it's only to delay the inevitable. Adapting picks him up, and the Fire Giant stolen away.
And that objective pool goes wrong for the same reasons that Goodnight Nick's team fight went so well for them in mid. Deathwalker's all the damage right now. There's no question about it. He killed basically 2 members on his own accord against Elysium in the mid lane, and there's just, once he's dead, I just don't see an impactful presence from Goodnight Nick out of the rest of their composition. And I'm not sure if it's builds or what, but Trixtank also a great job there by using that Sunder against Kalos to make him less relevant for taking that Fire Giant early on.
Well, no sign of the Hunter. Instead, he went for the Oni Fury Uru on the other side of the map, and we'll grab that one down. Meanwhile, the rest of Elysium will push up towards the right-hand side of the map, but be unsuccessful in grabbing anything there besides the Tier 2 tower. Phoenix defense, a little too much there out of Goodnight Nick, or maybe it's a little case of Elysium not really having that Phoenix pressure without Spudio on that side of the map.
And look, maybe this is a little bit of overkill, J-Mac, but Okeanos has to start using his purification beads for these Sobek plucks. You cannot continue to die because of Sobek plucks. Goodnight Nick probably kills that Fire Giant with how low they had to drop it. I believe, what, right around the 20% range? And they're dropping it because their Hunter is taking extra damage that he didn't need to if he just uses his purification beads. It's just a lot of questionable moments from some of the individual members out of Goodnight Nick that are leading to massive cost for the team overall.
With that, minions start pushing up the left and right lane. Oni minions already taken care of in mid thanks to Deathwalker, and the rest of Goodnight Nick will start to group up kind of in a split here. 2 in the left, 3 in the middle to defend against. There's only 1 Tier 2 tower left. Kalos gets plucked in by Trixtank, who takes quite a bit of damage in response from Okeanos. Kalos still pushing forward, goes into the transformation, snipes out of Spudio, not going to be too successful for it, but now Adapting goes in, looking for a target on the ultimate, but doesn't grab anybody. Instead, he'll fall, and Deathwalker, who ran into the back line by himself, will fall down to Spudio. That's 2 now off the board, almost 3. They're looking for a double here, but Trixtank doesn't have the cooldown to take down Wolfie or Okeanos, and instead, he'll set up for the Phoenix to fall on the left side.
Playing it safe for good reason. Elysium definitely having some respect for Wolfie and that Morgan Le Fay damage, as well as Kalos. I don't think anyone's really concerned about what Okeanos is doing, though, J-Mag, because Elysium largely ignoring this Heimdall and looking to focus out every other member from Goodnight Nick instead.
Trixtank goes in for the blink and not going to get anything off the pluck on top of that one. Instead, it's a lot of damage thrown onto Okeanos as he's forced to use that Aegis very early. Now both of his relics on cooldown. Trixtank happy to take up the tower for the time being, so Spudio can take down the Phoenix. That's both birds on the side lanes taken down. There is still a mid-tier 2 tower left to defend for Goodnight Nick, but outside of that, they haven't been able to put up a defense at these birds.
That T2 tower probably the only reason why Goodnight Nick doesn't lose all 3 Phoenixes in the process. Angry, slacking a little bit, didn't manage to take out that T2 in advance for the boys, so Elysium will just bide their time, go back to base, spend up all the gold they just acquired, though, from the successful bird sieges that they were able to aggress into Goodnight Nick's base with. And now, I think this is a prime opportunity for Adapting to do what he does best. He's just on the hunt for a pick.
Yeah, he grabbed Ice Eyes, but it's Ice Ice and Kalos on this side. Beads used instantly. The Brutalize hits Kalos instead of Ice Ice, and that'll be the end of that one for Adapting. Doesn't get anything there out of either the jungler or the support. No relics burned away, no ultimates burned either, and instead it's adapting relics that get taken out into the process.
A great play, though, from Callis to prevent Ice Ice from dying, because if he didn't connect with that Hammer Stun, Ice Ice was dead to rights.
Into the tier 2 tower, Elysium will walk. Trix Tank and Tarum going to be able to tank that one up so Spudio can drop it very quickly thanks to the help of the minions to shred those backdoor protections, so he'll be able to drop that tower very quickly. Fire Giant has fallen off the waist of Elysium, and now they can set themselves back up for another potential. But this time, Deathwalker is alive for this potential fight, so maybe Goodnight Nick have a little bit of a better leg to stand on with it. As you mentioned earlier, Deathwalker trying to will this team into existence, trying to will this fight into their favor seemingly single-handedly.
Something I was keeping an eye on, though, Spudio just back to base with 3,100 gold. Wasn't sold if he was going to spend it on upgrading his relics, and instead he invested for the 3k power pot. So if you thought he was hitting hard before, Deathwalker has certainly got his work cut out for him now in terms of trying to deal with this ROM in the backline.
Fire Giant started up, Spudio and Trix Tank inside the pit, and Spudio more than happy doing all the damage by himself, and it doesn't seem like there's any response from Goodnight Nick. They're just giving this one up. Wolfie has to go back to defend against the left Phoenix because those minions are starting to push a little too far forward. Mid tier 2 is down now, so they have one Phoenix left to attack, and Elysium look like they're going to make their sights towards that middle lane.
Ice Ice got to be careful, though. Trix Tank hovering inside of that mid jungle, and Ice Ice will successfully take out the red buff, but no one from his team that's going to be able to pick it up and actually utilize it. Now it's going to be mid Phoenix focus. Spudio doing a great job, and this bird is dead.
Yeah, no, as soon as that minion walked in there, that was all good for Spudio to take it down. Deathwalker going to get pushed away from the rest of the team. Tarum diving into the backline with Adapting, who picks up Ice Size, and the snipes are good to help take him down as Trix Tank gets credit for the kill onto it. Leap away by Kalas, and a big pluck throws him into the clutches of Adapting, and Deathwalker has to use the ultimate just to get back into the fountain. Elysium poised to close this game out quickly, shy of the 30-minute mark, but it's a double kill for Adapting. Another pluck by Trix Tank, and Wolfie nowhere to run, and luckily for him, the Titan falls before he does.
Yeah, it was just a full-on collapse there from Elysium, and I don't even know if it really would have made all that much of a difference had Ice Ice not looked towards that red buff earlier on and backed a little bit sooner. I really don't think it would have changed the outcome there. I think by that point in time, the late-game composition had just fully taken over there in favor of Elysium. Spudio just had so much control. He was free casting to his heart's content. That's like every ADC's dream.
I mean, it's anybody's dream when you just get to sit in the back line and keep holding that left click and W key onto it. But with that one, Elysium closed it to a 2-0. But we're going to cut it to a quick break, and then we'll be back on the desk to close it out. Welcome back here onto the desk for the Smite Challenger Circuit European Division 4, and Elysium come up with a big 2-0 victory over Goodnight Nick, able to solidify themselves their second set win in only 4 games doing so to get themselves up to the 2-0 into their standings. J-Mac and Taco joining me to kind of finish breaking down that game, and a little bit slower pacing there for Elysium. They didn't quite finish it as quickly as they did in the last one, but this one felt like it was much more dominant than game 1.
Definitely a lot of aggressive instances still for Elysium where they were able to essentially pull it off, J-Mac, looking very much like the Elysium we saw in the first split of the SCC. Now hoping to return to form split number 2. It doesn't even really seem like they skipped a beat adapting. Spudio, Trickstang, I think this entire roster really has just been performing as a whole.
And Spudio coming up big this time around, as you said, free casting pretty much the entire on this ROM, and what better world to live in than a free casting ADC?
It wasn't even just like the second game either. It was literally games 1 and 2. Spudio pretty much free to do whatever he wanted, and that says so much about how much of an impact Elysium's able to have in terms of space creation from their front line, in terms of peel potential for their back line. It is, without a doubt, going to be a long split for these other teams in the European SCC in terms of learning where best to try and control this Elysium roster.
But it is only week 2 for these teams, so there is still a lot of room to grow as well. Now that they've seen what Elysium can do in this newly formed meta, now that they've seen what they're capable of here in this mid-season section of the matchup, maybe we'll see some adaptations come their second face-offs later down the road for them. But even still, Elysium not shying one bit from their performances of Phase 1 in the Phase 1 playoffs. They're able to get their second win here. And see Angry putting up a lot of damage. Spudio 24,000 damage of his own. Wolfie as well, though, still holding out on this Morgan Le Fay. Again, no problem from Wolfie onto it. 606 on the GPM as well, so able to hold his own, but it just seems that the rest of the team kind of falling apart around him in those fights.
Wolfie has damage, he just doesn't have a whole lot in terms of follow-up and everything else that you're kind of looking for, but Elysium, all the same, they're undefeated, J-Mac, even if it is only 2 weeks in.
And Goodnight Nick, unfortunately, will fall to 0-2 onto it, and we'll see these other 4 teams playing throughout the week. There is still more SEC action to be had, both before and after SPL. Once the weekend comes around, you will see tomorrow we are going to have Sleekness and Average Joes on the North American side. Then again back to Just F6 and Team Joystick on the EU. And then Sunday we'll close out with some more NA with Winter Dogs and Tiburones. And then you can see there Snake Hunters Pandemonium and Herculean Who's Sturdy Artisans. Those will take place after the SPL on Saturday and Sunday. So make sure once you're done watching the SPL action to tune back in to see the community team take over and join us onto those matchups for it. But I mean, even with these going through, Snake Hunters, they're also up there with Elysium, tied for the number 1 position. Well, not tied at the moment because they are 1-0 versus 2-0, but against Pandemonium, that should be probably my match to watch amongst all the SCC matchups this week.
Should definitely be a fun one between Snake Hunters and Pandemonium, and I think that both of those teams definitely looking to be some of the main contestants when facing this Elysium Power Squad.
Yeah. With that one, again, congratulations to Elysium making themselves onto the 2-0 victory for it, but that's not all that we have for you today. This was just set 1 of the day, and it's only into the SCC. We've got SPL coming up at 1 o'clock, but before SPL, we also have the SPL waiting room with Gormizer and friends onto that one. But looking at the schedule for the SPL, there's a few matches in here I think everybody's going to be looking forward to. Jade Dragons and the Leviathans playing later on today. Oni Warriors and Valkyries will be our first matchup. But I'm also looking forward to tomorrow. Olympus Bolts and Camelot Kings. The Bolts still making that run for their all-time win record.
Yeah, the Olympus Bolt sets this week and are going to be pretty problematic, I think. Camelot Kings, Tartarus Titans, not easy foes to try and overcome when you're trying to maintain that undefeated streak for an all-time Smite history record.
Yeah, they need those 2 wins this week to tie it, and then they need their first win next week to crush the undefeated streak all-time record onto that one. We'll see if they're able to do that, but that'll be for tomorrow. Again, we do have Warriors and Valkyries today, and Dragons Leviathan's probably one of the matchups to watch as well for this match today, specifically onto it. But again, before we have that, there is still the waiting room. Gormizer and friends will be standing by onto that to bring you a lot of the big informative action onto it. So we're going to cut it to a break. We're going to get those guys here into the studio to bring you the waiting room. We're going to cut to a break. We'll be back in just a few minutes.